Welcome, good morning, and thank you for joining me for this online service of the First Unitarian Church of Alton, Illinois on the 7th day of February 2021. This is a lay-led congregation, and I am Tracy Howe-Koch, a worship associate at First UU Alton. Thank you for joining me today. We welcome everyone to this place of comfort, spirit, justice, and hope. We are Unitarian Universalists. If you have a candle or chalice at home, I invite you to join me as I light mine, saying the following. We hallow this time together by kindling the lamp of our heritage. Our opening words today come from Marta Valentin. We come together today to honor the universal community of seekers to which we all belong. We gather together today to share from our deepest place of safety that we might nurture ourselves by celebrating one another. We call into our presence this hour our ancestors, whose love, labor, and commitment made it possible for us to be here now. Let us call one another to the table of abundance, that we may feed on those fruits that sustain us and ever ask us to grow. Let us open to this moment with hearts that have no borders. Our first reading today comes from the Unitarian Universalist Association's Singing the Living Tradition. To laugh is to risk appearing the fool. To weep is to risk appearing sentimental. To reach out for another is to risk exposing our true self. To place our ideals, our dreams, before the crowd is to risk loss. To love is to risk not being loved in return. To hope is to risk despair. To try is to risk failure. To live is to risk dying. Our second reading is from Marquita Harold, The Risk of Complacency. Complacency is that place where things are okay, pretty darn good in fact. So maybe there are a few areas that could use some work, and even a few relationship struggles, but nothing bad enough to risk rocking the boat, right? Just to be clear, complacency is completely different from contentment. When you are content, you feel satisfied and at peace. Complacency is when you see the opportunity to grow, but choose instead to avoid challenging yourself or risking the discomfort and uncertainty of change. Opting instead to live by default rather than intention, simply taking life as it comes. Sadly, far too many, taking the path of least resistance, seemed like the best, most realistic option, only to find themselves, one day, looking back with shocking clarity on how much more fulfilling their lives could have been. Unitarian Universalism is based on 7 principles that are all-encompassing and global, yet dogma-free. They will be listed at the end of today's service. For those of you new to Unitarian Universalism, I wanted to show you the short video which helps clarify what we stand for. Enjoy.
We are Unitarian Universalists. We are people of many paths who are brave, curious, and compassionate thinkers and doers. Every day, people are inundated with information, overwhelmed by demands, and pulled by a culture that seeks to divide us from the web of life. Unitarian Universalism reconnects, bringing people together with meaning and inspiration. We are a house without walls, a congregation without spiritual limits, and a movement that calls you to put more faith in yourself, your community, and your beliefs. We are a faith that honors your mind, your heart, your journey. Simply put, we are a guided path towards a better you and a better world. Grounded in hundreds of years of thoughtful, religious communities, we are people of many generations, ethnicities, genders and sexualities, and spiritual backgrounds. People engaged in making the world a better place. People focusing on what really matters: love, justice, integrity, and hope. Unitarian Universalists have different beliefs, but shared values. We are Unitarian Universalists, and at the same time, we may also be agnostic, Buddhist, Christian, Hindu, humanist, Jewish, Muslim, pagan, atheist, believers in God, and those who let the great mystery be. The diversity of beliefs you'll find in a Unitarian Universalist community is one of our strengths. We're always learning how to see the world from a different perspective. What unites us are our core principles that uphold 7 real-world values: believing in the worthiness of every person, showing compassion and fairness, accepting others for who they are, growing through a personal search for truth, leading with democratic spirit, working for justice, and understanding that everything is interconnected. 7 days a week, Unitarian Universalists live these principles by doing. When we gather, we worship, reflect, and remind ourselves what matters most in life. Whatever our age, we learn to live with more wisdom, more awareness, more gratitude, and more soul. We show our values by showing up to answer the call for social justice. We have a track record of standing on the side of love for civil rights, LGBTQ equality, immigration reform, environmental sustainability, reproductive justice, racial justice, and more. Find what it means to live your deepest values out loud. Join us on this extraordinary adventure of faith.
Hi, I'm Gregory Gaines. Please call me Greg. I was born and raised in the Baptist tradition until the day I turned 18, and I said, that's enough for me. I graduated my last 2 years of high school out of a vocational school, North County Technical School, as a welder. Took a apprenticeship as a machinist, and I am a skilled tradesman. Always been a bit of a wanderer, and I looked up the word wanderer just to make sure there was still a word. It was actually a word, and the definition I got was a covenantor prosecuted by Charles II and James II, especially one who fled home to follow rebellious Presbyterian ministers who refused to accept
episcopacy.
The episcopacy. New word for me. Wanderer. And I have to admit that rings true with just about every Unitarian Universalist that I have ever met. Wanderers seeking community for support. Back in the 90s, I wandered into Emerson Chapel. At that time, they were meeting at a little Jewish chapel there on Manchester Road. Was involved with them for a while. Took off. Lived down in Houston, Texas for a while. Was involved with First Unitarian Church of Houston, Unitarian Universalist Church of Houston. Come back to St. Louis and was involved with the First Unitarian Church of St. Louis for a while. Took off again on an adventure or two. Decided that it was time to settle down, grow up and settle down, so I got a decent job, a stable job in St. Louis. I wanted to explore meditating in the Buddhist tradition, so I Googled Buddhism St. Louis. And there was a little group meeting at the First Unitarian Church of St. Louis, and I'm thinking, hey, I know them people, I'm there. So I became involved with that little Buddhist group, and I am still associated with them. As far as Alton goes, I went bow fishing upriver on the Illinois side of the Mississippi and was coming back in. And instead of making that right to go across the bridge back to Missouri, I decided to go straight and out of curiosity, do a little exploring in Alton. I think Alton, Illinois is a pretty cool little town. And I drove by this really cool building that had a Unitarian Universalist sign on it. I said, man, I got to check that out. So I showed up one Sunday morning, and there was this nice lady that ushered me into the sanctuary. And I go, wow, this is really quaint. She goes, yes, it is. So I sat down and was very at ease, very comfortable, felt at home. And the congregation, you guys, made me feel very welcome, and I appreciate that very much. In closing, the thing that I enjoy about Unitarian Universalism is that I am allowed to explore my spirituality without the dogma or the fear or the guilt. And with that, I want to say that I look forward to our relationship in our community. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm so glad you're here, and I'm glad you're joining me on this cold and blustery day in February. The sermon theme for this month is risk, and that is a huge subject with so many layers. It was almost too overwhelming to take on. My mind was racing with all the directions the sermon can take, but I settled on risk as a way to move forward. And forewarning you, though, I may end up rambling, and who knows where this will actually end up. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Henry Louis Gates program, Finding Your Roots. If you haven't had a chance to watch it, he invites people on his show and then does a deep dive into their ancestry with all the incredible research that is available to him and his team, and often even does DNA sampling. It's incredible what they're able to find out. It's a deeply engaging as it mixes documentations and stories, and most of the participants are pretty impressed and surprised, because every family has their secrets and their histories, and it's just awe-inspiring. They all took a risk to come to a new country to better their lives, whether it was due to religious persecution, better opportunity, or to flee war, maybe to flee a family situation. And honestly, some of the risk obviously was not chosen risk. Some of the risk was enforced upon peoples, and it's very fascinating to see how those family lines developed through a situation that was horrendous, to be truthful. The ones that they tend to focus on are the ones that felt like leaving their country was a way to move their lives forward. Taking a risk means a betterment for their family, new opportunities. But while that's exciting and wonderful, I cannot imagine moving to a country where you don't know anybody, you're leaving your family, you don't have work, and you don't speak the language. It's just mind-boggling. But they did it for so many different reasons, whether they chose to do it or if it was forced upon them. All I can think of is it was brave. It's just incredibly brave. My own ancestors were very early arrivals to this country, this already occupied country. I think it was just a man, was an indentured servant on the Mayflower. And somehow he got here and he survived, which is just shocking. And soon after that, several more of my family ancestors came over. I don't know why they came, because if you look closely in the war annuals, we were kind of on the side of the British in the War of Independence. So the people who came over here were taking a huge risk and obviously did not reach out much to their family after that. But to tell you the truth, we were not a rags to riches story. We were not the Alexander Hamilton types. We weren't here trying to build a new nation. We, from what I can understand and look at, we're just trying to survive. That was it. We were trying to survive, and that's what we did. Whether it was through continually moving west, which is what my family did. It's fascinating. I've seen pictures where they took a risk, left the East Coast, where most of the settlements were, moved out west, living in caves along the way, and eventually they settled in South Dakota and became farmers. An almost exact similar story happened on my mother's side. Not quite as far back as the Mayflower, but coming over here, traveling west, subsistence farmers, sharecroppers, and finally able to own a little land in Wyoming, which is where they settled. But they kept moving for survival. They took the risk. Moving west would grant them benefits that they couldn't have here. And I still think that's a form of courage. Of course, I see the privilege in this risk-taking. While it was hard and difficult, in the end, it was a choice they had. It was a belief that their risk would pay off. Those whose lands were stolen from them or were stolen from their land, risk is taking on a whole different paradigm. Risk was entrusting the occupier to uphold the agreements that they had made, which often was a terrible risk that did not end well. And it was also disappearing in the night, taking the risk and running and hoping you would find those who would help you and support you and move you out of the terrible bondage you had been forced into. It was a huge risk. And honestly, it still is a risk for many just to go walking down the street. I think a lot of the risk taken by migrants and refugees I am overwhelmed by the deplorable conditions of the camps that many of them are forced to live in, the way human beings in distress are treated, and the thought of how awful their home situations must be for them to leave, knowing that they will likely be received in such a cruel and inhumane way. But knowing all that, they still took a risk. They still had a belief that it could get better. And for that, I just can't even imagine. I think about taking my children with me, nothing, running off to a country where you don't know if you'll be met with friendly folks or not, or if they'll take you in. But it's a risk you have to take, and some risks are risks you have to take. When I look back at my life, it is immediately apparent I am not a big risk taker, not like my ancestors. I have almost always taken the solid, expected road. I like to think I stretch myself here and there, but always in a calculated, well thought out way. I would say my biggest risk wasn't getting married at 22, but was that even a risk? When the person you marry feels like jumping into a secure situation? Maybe it was. I don't know. Having children was a risk. You never can predict how that'll turn out, but once again, it was an expected risk, and it didn't really feel like it was all that crazy of a choice. Lots of people do it all the time. I would say, once again, probably the biggest risk for myself and for my family was when I decided to leave the workforce and stay home after I had my second child, which through a lot of planning and belt tightening and all of that, it was a huge financial and mental risk, but we did it, and I'm really glad we did, because so many people don't even have that choice. But it didn't come without certain costs. Trying to think the best way to explain that, because it's so lucky to be able to do, but it was a huge risk to me personally. And, it was incredible to be there for my children, and I was lucky. But I also lost so many working years, and while I'm working now, it's nowhere where I thought it would be. And to tell you the truth, the mental health of staying home alone with some young children, it can be pretty harsh. But I did it. I got lucky. I was lucky, and we moved forward through that. Many of us, though, fall into a pattern of complacency. As the reading noted, though, complacency is when you see the need and opportunity to grow, but choose instead to avoid challenging yourself or risking the discomfort and uncertainty of change. I think that's very well said, because I think we've all been at that place. Risk is scary. Complacency is known. Going into the unknown goes against our fundamental need for safety and security. But does it move us forward? Are we really living this one life at its fullest? Lots of people coast along and are okay with that. And I certainly have been there and probably still am, to tell you the truth. Coasting is kind of easy, and it, makes life kind of nice if you can, if you're lucky to be in that space. Maybe you have settled into a life that meets your needs, but are you just going through the motions? When I look back at my life, I see a person who is nowhere near where I thought I would be at this time of my life. I do not have many of the challenges that prevent me from risk-taking. It's actually very overwhelming, the possibilities the world has to offer. If only I was willing to take the first step, the risk. I have very few things blocking me, except for myself. Maybe you've found yourself in this quandary. You know you need to move forward, but you just can't. How do you get there? I don't have any answers, and I don't feel like I'm any sort of shining example of risk-taking. But maybe starting with small steps will lead to those big life changes that you need to make to live our best life. So what's holding you back? Apathy, a partner who's complacent also and is comfortable with that. Finances, which is a huge issue. Health can make or break so many opportunities for yourself. You don't know where to begin. There's just way too many options out there. Or fear of failure. I personally think that fear of failure is probably one of the leading issues. I was recently watching a movie, And one of the main characters noted, every day is full of little failures. So think about that. Every day is full of little failures. It's kind of harsh to hear, but it's kind of true too, because you could also look at every day as full of successes. But let's focus on this side for a moment. When you look at it that way, what is there to be afraid of? You've already survived thousands and thousands of failures. Obviously, that is a super simple way to look at it, but it does shine a light that you can do this. I find it tremendously difficult to put myself out there. I have a huge fear of humiliation and have had many personal experiences with my ego being severely put in check. Many years ago, I joined the woodwind quintet, No Strings Attached. We've played at Alton before, so I'm sure some of you have heard us. At the time, though, I was a stay-at-home mom and needed an outlet outside of my family. I needed to do something. I needed a little space. I have played the piano. Well, I do play the piano, but I've played the clarinet all through high school and through college, and was mediocre at best. And since college, I had not played for many, many years. I knew, though, that if I didn't put myself out there, I would, in hindsight, regret that I did not have enough chutzpah to take the risk of rejection. Honestly, when I went to play with them the first time, I sounded terrible. I mean, really terrible. But the other folks in the group still welcomed me with open arms. If I had not taken a risk, I would have missed out on so many wonderful and sometimes mortifying experiences, and one of them actually happened at Alton, and I'm not going to elaborate on it because it was mortifying. But those scary situation I had built up in my head was not the reality, and I need to remember that. I have also failed so spectacularly and been embarrassed and humiliated at risks I've taken. And I'm not even going to talk about them because, you know what, they're for me. But I experienced them. But no matter how painful they were, I learned something. And I don't regret having tried. And I think I would regret more if I hadn't tried. I think that no matter how painful, they're a way to grow in compassion and understanding. If we all committed to taking some risk, obviously within bounds of comfort and possibility, and all could draw on that well of failure, perhaps there would be more growth in the world as we recognize the courage it took for someone to step forward and say, I'll try. I will look to the future. I'm ready to change and grow, and we as a community would help them because we know how hard it is to do alone. I ask you all to reflect this week on the risks you have taken or not taken. What were your successes? Was it hard to get there? What were your failures? Are you over them? Did you learn something from them? Do you want to grow from them? Do you regret any of those decisions? Was the regret a learning opportunity for future success? Maybe something was just a downright failure. And you know what? And that's okay because you took a step forward. And only by taking some risks are we ever going to move forward. And I encourage you all to look at it in that light. You can be complacent in the life you have. You could take a risk, and the risk might fail like we talked about, or it might succeed beyond your wildest dreams. As Mary Oliver asks, tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? Amen. As we approach this time for our offering, give what you will, for you are generous people. I invite you to either mail your offering to First Unitarian offices or use the Givelify app. Doing so will help us meet our financial responsibility to you at the end of the year. This morning's offering will be most sincerely and gratefully received. May it be lovingly given. Please join me in our offering prayer, which is projected on the screen. May this offering equip us to inspire love and to seek justice. I encourage everyone to be on the lookout for emails from the church office. They are the best way to keep up to date on announcements and updates at First UU Alton. You may also check out our website, newsletter, and Facebook page. Please join me as we extinguish our chalice. The light of truth and meaning cannot be put out. We are the keepers of this flame until we meet again. Our closing words today is A Blessing for Risk Takers and Failures by Robin Tanner. Today, we share in a blessing for losers, risk takers, and all failures far and wide. Blessed are they who fall in the mud, who jump with gusto and rip the pants, who skin the elbows and bruise the ego, for they shall know the sweetness of risk. Blessed are they who make giant mistakes, whose intentions are good, but impact has injured, who know the hot sense of regret and ask for mercy, for their hearts will know the gift of forgiveness. Blessed are they who have seen a D, or an F, or a C, or any letter less than perfect, who are painfully familiar with the red pen and the labels less than, for they know the wisdom in the imperfect. Blessed are they who try again, who dust off, who wash up, who extend the wish for peace, who return to sites of failure, who are dogged in their pursuits, for they will discover the secret to dreams. Blessed are they who refuse to listen to the naysayers, for their hearts will be houses of hope. Blessed are they who see beyond the surface of another, for they will be able to delight in the gift of compassion. Blessed are they who stop running the race to help a fellow traveler, who pick up the fallen, who stop for the injured, for they shall know the kindness of strangers. Blessed are they who wildly, boldly abandon winning, for they shall know the path of justice. Amen. Until we meet again.